I want to start this off by saying I'm not the one involved in these cases. All of these files I got from different people in the first responder field of work, and a few detectives that have since retired. After collecting these stories over the years, I just wanted to share them with you guys on the internet and see what you guys had to say about some of the stories. Not that I'm hoping that any self-proclaimed comment cop or Reddit detective can step in and solve the case, but I'm sure that won't stop a few of you from trying. Oh, and of course, a lot of the names and such have been changed to protect those involved. Case number 1. Randy Sullivan, the Frozen Man. On April 18th, 2016, tenants of an apartment complex called in to report a foul scent coming from within the building, and that the floor around the door number 9 was soaking wet. No one had seen anyone enter or leave in some time, and heard nothing but the sound of television on the other side of the door. So the landlord comes and unlocks it, and sure enough, there's a body in there. Sitting on the couch upright was Mr. Randy Sullivan, just as if he was still watching TV in his boxers. Weird thing is, the whole place is soaking wet, as if the pipes burst and flooded the whole thing. I mean, the carpet is ruined, the furniture has that awful smell of waterlogged fabric, and Sullivan himself was soaked from head to toe. The other odd thing was that every electrical outlet and window was covered in insulation foam. TV was the only thing still plugged in, displaying the usual infomercial crap to the dead man. The next thing that was weird was that none of the water pipes had burst, nor none of the faucets were left running. It was like a flash flood. It just came right through the place in this tiny one-bedroom apartment and stopped just a few hours before the door was opened up for the first time in months. Randy Sullivan was 44, lived alone, never married, had no children either. He worked odd jobs but was unemployed for 2 months before his death. His rent was always on time, and there was never any complaints about the man, but the landlord and his neighbors just suspected him to be a loner. The part that still gets me is that after the autopsy, his cause of death was hypothermia. The guy froze to death on his couch in his boxers in April, and like, what the fuck, right? Yeah, well, no sign of foul play and no real leads. The case went cold. Case number 2. Donnie Edmunds, Let Us Die. This one comes from an old friend of mine who used to be an EMT. Back when he had been working with the local scene for about a year and a half, he had several calls to this one home out in the middle of nowhere. A rundown old mobile home that housed a couple in their late 50s, both unemployed by now and living the great retirement lifestyle. That one being of Donnie day drinking and his wife Helen complaining that the world was falling down around her, as she popped way too many pills and, more often than not, had to be rushed off to get her stomach pumped, only to repeat it all again about a month later. So when he got the call for the familiar address, he had figured it was just the routine thing. Escort her to the hospital, listen to an old man gripe and reek of cheap beer the whole ride over. Well, they got to the property, but first thing they see is Helen sitting on the front steps and sobbing loudly, holding herself. It turns out that as they were sitting there in the living room, just chatting it up and having a normal conversation, Donnie Edmunds produced a pistol, and in one motion, he shot himself in the head. So they get to work prepping the body to be moved, and all the while talking to the wife. According to her, her husband had not seemed upset or sad or anything out of ordinary, and at the time of their conversation, they were, as far as she could tell, both in a decent mood. Well, as they got started on him, the old man, whose blood was splattered across the wall behind him, looked at the two guys, as in his eyes darted right to them, and then he stood up and shouted at both the paramedics, "Leave! Let us die! Just let us die!" with an absolutely furious expression before he collapsed again. They rushed him to the hospital, and luckily enough for Mr. Edmunds, he lived. He claims he has no memory of that day, nor any thoughts of self-harm before that point. His blood alcohol level was 0. Over the next few years, my friend would tell me that they never had another call out to that house again. And the last he heard, Donnie Edmunds was a sober man. Case number 3. Beth Holton. The Walking Dead. This is one that is similar to the last story, but the ending... well, the ending isn't as nice, so just prepare yourself for that one. Miss Beth lived alone on a small farm property that her late husband had left her after his passing away. She was the picture of the sweet old grandma you see in any family gathering that warms your heart and hits you right in the nuts with nostalgia. Every Sunday her grandkids would come together for lunch and they'd all enjoy a home-cooked meal made by Mrs. Beth. Well, one Sunday in December the family drives up and finds that things just aren't normal. First of all, the front yard is scuffed up like an army had marched up on the grass and fought hand to hand with their enemies, and then simply walked off. They went to the house to find that the door was unlocked, and inside, just over the threshold, was a trail of blood and dirty hand and footprints. Human prints, like someone was crawling around on all fours with dirt from outside coating their palms. Her daughter followed the trail to the back of the house, where the master bedroom was. Inside, her worst fear came true. On the bed was her mother's corpse, blood everywhere, as her mother had multitudes of sharp objects stabbed into her and still sticking out of her. Police investigation puts the death around 11:30 p.m. The cause of death? Multiple self-inflicted stab wounds across her body. From the recreation the investigators could put together, there was a large gathering on her front lawn. At the same time, she proceeded to lie in bed and stab herself with multiple knives, ice picks, and other sharp objects, just again and again into her own body. And then lay there for a moment before getting up, walking to the front door, and unlocking it and letting someone in to walk in on all fours. She would then return to her bed, lie back in the same spot, and bleed out. The prints were tracked all over the house as if the person was looking for something, but nothing of value was stolen and nothing was really out of place. The prints also had no known matches in the police database. The case was ruled a suicide but never officially closed. Well, that's all the stories I got for you for now. There's a few more. Quite a few. And some are a little more interesting than others. Some are... well, to be honest, I wouldn't blame you if you thought I just made most of this shit up. Anyway. Take it easy out there. Due to the nature of these stories, I don't really want to give out my actual name. As you can guess, I've already had more than a few run-ins with official sources, authorities, and a few that I can only imagine were on the borderline paranormal themselves. So, for now, just call me Detective. No, I'm not a real detective, nor have I ever worked in a criminal investigation field, but this is the internet, and if people can call themselves rainbow zebras and make friends online, then I can call myself a detective, damn it. Anyway, for those of you who don't know, I collect different weird stories from police, EMTs, soldiers, and the like. I call them my case files. Most of them remain unsolved, but I'm not looking for any answers here. I just feel like these cases need to be shared. Something to remind us all that the truth is, stranger than fiction sometimes. Some names and dates are changed to protect those involved, obviously. Case number 18. Eddie. Shadow People. Now this one comes in from an old war vet I met with after looking for another similar string of shadow people sightings. Ed was wrinkled, sun-dried, with a shaggy head of white hair and a very kind of vulgar sense of humor. For my first phone call to set up a meeting with him, I had never thought it possible to hear the word fuck so many times in under 60 seconds. His last words to me before I hung up were, "Fuck yeah, I'll tell you my fucking weird fucking story. Fucking nice." A real expanded vocabulary, that one. What follows is my transcription of Eddie's story, with as few F-bombs as I could get away with removing. Yeah, so it was probably like 0300 and we had just been run ragged and them fucking bugs were eating us alive, boys. Let me tell you. We were tired, sick of being in the jungle, and ready to get our soaking wet socks off. I was near the front of the patrol, and I know I was supposed to be looking around and watching my ass, but it's late, and the full moon was shining through, so I thought I could just watch my feet shuffle along and zone out until we got back. But that's when the guy in front of me, Corporal, gasped. But it was too late. Poor guy took a spike board right to the gut and chest, and as soon as it was sprung, we were in an ambush. So we hit the dirt, firing back at the muzzle flashes pointing at us from the jungle darkness ahead. They were probably less than a few hundred meters away. We were in a bad spot, for sure. But then we started to notice something. The gunfire hadn't stopped, but the sounds of rounds flying over and hitting the trees around us did. See, they weren't firing at us anymore. They were fighting with something else. So we stopped shooting and just watched the flashes from the bushes where we was in. Then that is when we heard the screaming. Not like orders being shouted or taunts or, the general panic, but blood-chilling screams. And I mean, it's just as fast as that shit started, it was over. No more rounds being fired, no more screams. Just the night jungle air around us with a few rays of moonlight hitting in certain areas. So we sat there, all barrels pointed towards the spot where we were sure they were at. And we waited for what felt like forever. But nothing. Well, nothing until it sounded like movement. The rustling leaves coming right for us. Anyway, that's when we fired off a flare overhead. Yeah, it'd make us stand out, but we had to see them too. You have to remember, we were just a bunch of scared and tired kids back then. Anyway, when the flare went up, we saw people, but they weren't the ones we were expecting. They were these skinny figures just standing in the jungle, and even with the flare's light shining on them, it gave us a good look at them, but they remained these solid black shapes. They didn't like that bright light too much though, so when it went up, they all scattered back into the dark. And I don't mean like they just sprinted, they leaped and crawled all around the foliage until they were just gone. But even without them in sight, I could feel like they were still watching. So we broke off after that, hightailed it away. They sent us back the morning after looking for a body count, but well, they got one. Because we found 14 dead enemies in that spot where we had engaged them. Only thing is, we didn't hit a single fucking thing. Not one of those bastards had a single gunshot wound. No, whatever got to them had clawed them real good. Hell, it tore them sons of bitches apart. We hauled the chunks of meat and limbs back out of there, and I heard some high ranks came down to collect them personally. Well, anyway, we got told that it was just some combat fatigue, and we were successful in defeating an enemy ambush. But if you saw those... Look, all I'm gonna say is that a rifle don't leave claw marks, and it sure as hell don't gouge out eyes. Ed took a moment to recompose himself and was back to making jokes soon after. He offered me a cigarette, which I declined, and he offered me a few more stories about his time in. None of them were of any interest to my collection, however. I think it did the old guy some good to remember and tell his stories. I think in a weird way, he just wanted to tell someone who would listen for once. And in some weird way, I believe him. Case number 4. Jane Doe. Fallen Angel. In the early evening hours of a peaceful Saturday, an object fell from the sky and landed in a field behind Robbie Decker's home. Robbie and his wife Maria were sitting on their rocking chairs and conversing when they saw something fall right out of the sunset-painted clouds and land hard with an impact that kicked up dirt high into the air. Robbie called authorities and had sheriff deputies come out and take a look. Once on the scene, they all made their way to the field with searchlights in tow and inspected the scene to find mangled corpse of a woman. The impact had essentially turned the poor girl into a barely recognizable form. Her bones beyond repair, her blood pooled into the dirt, making a stained, muddy, dark residue, and her long black hair was matted, tangled in a mess that clung to the fragments of what used to be her head. Upon viewing the sight, the three men all began to weep and sob uncontrollably. They all reported feeling a great loss of hope and dread, as if they were just told the most important person in their lives were just killed. This feeling afflicted anyone who came to view the corpse, making the removal process a very difficult task. Well, even more difficult than scraping a crumbled person out of a crater is. I got around to asking a few of the hands that helped move that one and found out a few more weird things had happened afterwards. For one, she had no clothing whatsoever. Also, there were no flights to be recorded traveling over that area at that time, nor did the couple see anything beyond a falling figure. So this naked woman just seemed to fall right out of the sky. Bare skin and subjected to the cold, slicing winds before hitting the ground harder than what should have been possible. Next is that her body began to decay fast. Even once they had her in the morgue, she was showing signs of decay equal to a body left out in the sun for weeks. By this point, the sorrow people felt for her had no effect upon viewing the body. Within 48 hours, there was little more than a heap of broken bones. Any attempt at getting samples for testing also failed, as none of them were viable for use once separated from the girl. Eventually, they had to seal up her brittle, cracking bones in a container, and before the month was done, barely anything but a small dust pile remained in their place. Now that's it. I'll post some more once I go through some of the first cases I collected. I'm moving soon, so this gives me a chance to reorganize my folders and relive some of the strange things I first found out about. Anyway, thanks for listening. It is never easy losing a loved one, especially when it's so sudden you barely have time to process it. A missing persons case is always hard to crack, especially when you have very little to go on. Sometimes factors just line up and, well, we can't find the clues we need. Sometimes a person just wants to start new, run away from something that, well, they just can't bear to face in their lives. And sometimes the whole damn thing just doesn't make any damn sense. But it's generally accepted that a death is easier to cope with, at least when there's a body, mostly, and brings some sort of closure to the victims' families' lives. But for missing person cases, that not knowing can really eat at you from the inside out. Case number 14. Gone in a flash. Amber Wilkins was just a woman trying to get back on her feet. She had been addicted to hard drugs for a few years, and it hit that rock bottom part that, well, all abusers do, and she finally got straight when she had an OD, and they threatened to take her son away. Recovery is a difficult road, but she managed to stay on it for some time. Eventually, she landed a job as a gas station clerk and worked the night shift. Wasn't much, but when you drop out of high school and have no real skills, you take whatever you can get. 8 months of sobriety and 2 of them at the Lucky Star station had started to give her a much brighter future. At least, that's what it seemed like. One night at approximately 2:47 a.m., Amber called the local police to report a suspicious man on the property. Following is transcribed from the call made by Amber.
Hello? I'd like to report a strange man. He's been walking around the building. He's dressed in all black and keeps circling the building. I'm at the Lucky Star gas station at the end of Liberty Avenue. Please send someone soon. He keeps staring in at me.
Yes, ma'am. We'll have a car out there in a few moments. In the meantime, can you describe the man to me so I can tell my officer what to look for?
He's in a black suit with a jacket, it looks like. Dress pants that match too. He has a thin mustache and brown hair. His clothes are clean, but he looks a bit rough in the face. I can't tell much else about... Wait.
Ma'am, what's going on?
He's standing out front now, by the pumps. He's just staring. He won't stop looking at me. Go away!
Ma'am, please stay calm. Lock the doors, and the officers will be there shortly. They are barely 2 minutes away now.
I've locked it, but please, you need to hurry. I can't explain it, but I can feel him looking at me. I can't hide from his stare. He keeps staring at me, and it's crushing me. Please help. I can't breathe. I can't think. He's doing so much to me, and he's just staring.
Ma'am, please remain calm. He can't hurt you from outside. Take a deep breath in and tell me your next.
The dispatcher was cut short as Amber Wilkins let out a terrified scream, following a loud crash, and then an unidentified noise before all the power to the store was lost. Shortly after this, the officers arrived to find the store cloaked in total darkness. They searched the area and found no sign of anyone on the property, not even Amber herself. Once inside the store, it was a mess and smelt of burnt hair. Only thing that was left of poor Amber was a melted store phone and scorch marks on the tile floor with shoe prints that matched her size. As if she was reduced to nothing in less than a second. No other trace of her was found. Ever. Power outage fried the camera system, so no evidence could be pulled from that. So until this day, Amber Wilkins of the Lucky Star gas station is declared a missing person. Case number 45. Chimaera. You freaks out there like cryptids? Yeah, of course you do. You're listening to something like this after all. Well, I have a few stories about weird creatures, but here is one that might catch your interest the most. Around 5 years ago, there was this string of consistent reports of a strange person. Or, well, people would be more accurate. Sorta, anyway. They all followed the same behavior, and that is what tipped off a few people who were in the same circles of weirdness like myself, that the description of the person was always different. Male or female, fairly androgynous in appearance, always spotted in the late evening or early morning hours just whenever the sun was at its dimmest point. However, the person would always be underdressed for the current weather and always in fairly remote areas of the national park where this took place. The witnesses said the people were sketchy and skittish and would not respond when spoken to, just staring straight ahead and looking like a deer in headlights with big glassy eyes. Then, after just standing there, they would walk in a way to not break eye contact. They'd shuffle sideways or backwards and disappear into the woods. Well, the park rangers had never found so much in the way of evidence, so one guy, during his downtime, took it upon himself to get in the proof that some weirdos were actually out there in the woods. So this fine young man with too much time on his hands goes out there with a camera and a pack for 3 days, built just for roughing it in the great outdoors. Made sure his clothing was layered up so he can get some sleep 1 hour after the sun went down, and not eat a fire, and then wake up 1 hour before sun rises. Now, I am sure both you and him were expecting him not to find much for the first 2 days, but as his testimony is told, he was just waking up after 5 a.m. on the second day out there in the woods when some weird chittering noise was coming from behind a tree. So, he gets up and he lets his eyes adjust, and to his surprise, something is out there. Not a person, but something crawling on 4 legs. 2 legs in the back were bent like a grasshopper's, and the 2 in the front looked like skinny human arms. Pulled itself forward. The thing's head was hanging down, but it looked like a noseless, beady-eyed, lipless attempt at a human face. It was pink and hairless all over. He recounted just standing there, watching in shock as he tried to process what the hell he was watching. He describes as the thing was walking just behind the trees beyond his campsite and faced in the direction of the sun. As it was cresting the horizon, he said that this creature stood on the back 2 legs, standing upright, that the joints in the legs then morphed and pushed forward until they looked more like human legs. The creature threw its head back, and what was the back of its head formed into a face, one more human than the other. The chest grew 2 lumps that formed into what resembled female breasts without any nipples. The rest of the creature remained motionless, featureless and smooth. No genitals, no hair, not a single blemish on its mockery of human anatomy. Then it changed its skin color from a light, fleshy pink to one of an African American tone of skin. It stood there drinking in the first rays of sunlight and formed hair that covered its head. And then a shirt and shorts grew around its torso and waist. Despite being around 30 or so degrees, it just chose a casual pair of clothing to mimic somehow. It was by now our entranced explorer realized he had found his fabled freak show and was fishing for his camera. So the big brain takes it out, frames the shot, and snaps it. Flash and all. He said that the thing snapped its new face towards him, and despite looking shocked, it never moved past that. So he did what any rational person at that point would do when a creature of the forest comes and looks at him. He threw a cliff bar at it and bolted away. Ran all the way back to the nearest ranger station, and tells them about it. Of course, he got laughed at, asked what he was smoking that night, and dismissed. Now, I talked to that guy, and he seems pretty straight-laced. Nothing that stood out as nutty to me. That's why with his testimony and the public reports and other speculations about that place, I am very inclined to believe this one. Well, ladies and gentlemen, and whoever or whatever else is out there, I'm thankful that all of you were interested in these stories, and well, there's still a lot more. There's probably too many to really keep count, but like I said, I think my time of collecting these are over, but I'm glad they were able to get out there. So hey, if you got anything weird that you know of, don't be afraid to write it down. Sure, whoever you tell at the local coffee shop might not believe you, but some stranger on the internet might. Thank you everyone for watching and listening in with tonight's video. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I would highly recommend you go and check out the other people that are in this video, their voices. I will have their links down below, and if you watched at the time, I'm probably going to have it in the little bubble up at the top as well. Again, I just want to say thanks, and I hope you all are keeping safe and doing well, and most of all, have a good evening. And don't forget to like and subscribe to me here, and if you got a weird story, I'm always willing to listen.